Welcome to the Unseen Shelf. In this series of World War, we will explore World War I with different books, and also with different angles. Today, we will talk about The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. The preface of this book serves as a compelling introduction to the book, setting a tone of urgency and reflection. Tuchman opens by establishing the purpose of her work, to explore how the world descended into the catastrophe of World War I. She narrows her focus to the pivotal month of August 1914, a period that marked the dramatic shift from diplomatic tension to open warfare. While the roots of the war extend back through decades of geopolitical maneuvering, Tuchman argues that the events of this single month reveal the mechanisms and missteps that made conflict inevitable. Central to her narrative is the theme of inevitability, though not in the sense of a predetermined fate. Instead, she examines how a series of human miscalculations, rigid alliances, and inflexible military strategies created a situation where war became unavoidable. Leaders across Europe believed that the conflict, if it came, would be short and decisive, each nation confident in its own plans for victory. However, Tuchman underscores the tragic irony of this belief, noting how the very structures meant to ensure security instead bound nations to courses of action that led to disaster. Focusing on August 1914 allows Tuchman to illuminate how decisions made during this brief period set the tone for the entire war. It was a time when the pace of events accelerated beyond the ability of governments to control, transforming what might have been a regional conflict into a global catastrophe. Diplomatic efforts faltered, military plans unfolded with a grim momentum, and the potential for compromise was eclipsed by the machinery of mobilization and war. By examining this critical juncture, Tuchman illustrates how the war's character, its scope, brutality, and duration was shaped in its earliest days. Throughout the preface, Tuchman reflects on the avoidable suffering of World War I, emphasizing how poor foresight and systemic constraints led leaders to disastrous decisions. Her evocative, incisive writing blends historical analysis with vivid storytelling, underscoring the enduring relevance of these events. She closes with a somber reminder that the choices of a few can shape the destiny of millions, urging readers to learn from history's failures to guide the future. The first chapter of The Guns of August opens with a vivid and symbolic scene: the funeral of Edward VII in May 1910. Tuchman describes this grand event as a gathering of Europe's royal families, a moment that encapsulated the intricate network of alliances, bloodlines, and traditions binding the continent's monarchies together. Kings, emperors, princes, and dignitaries from across Europe came to pay their respects to the late British king, who had served as a unifying figure in an increasingly fragmented political landscape. In this procession of mourning, they appeared as a cohesive family of Europe, bound not only by diplomacy but also by shared ancestry. Yet, beneath the outward show of unity, Tuchman masterfully weaves an undercurrent of foreboding. These same monarchs, who now walked side by side in solemn tribute, would, in just a few years, preside over nations embroiled in a devastating war. The image of this family would soon shatter under the weight of rivalries, alliances, and the ambitions of empire. Tuchman's narrative underscores the irony of this gathering, highlighting how the personal relationships and camaraderie among Europe's rulers failed to prevent the drift toward conflict. Edward VII himself, often called the Uncle of Europe due to his familial ties to nearly every major royal house, had played a critical role in maintaining balance among the great powers during his reign. His death marked the end of an era where diplomacy was often shaped by personal connections and informal agreements among leaders. As the funeral procession moved through London, the grandeur of the ceremony seemed to mask the brewing tensions that would soon erupt. In her rich prose, Tuchman paints this event not merely as a historical moment, but as a poignant symbol of the fragile order that would crumble within a few short years. By opening with Edward VI's funeral, Tuchman sets the stage for the tragedy to come. The unity on display that day, fleeting and superficial, serves as a haunting contrast to the disunity and devastation that would soon engulf Europe. It is a reminder of the human connections that were unable to withstand the forces of militarism, nationalism, and the rigid machinery of alliances that would drive the continent to war. Barbara Tuchman delves deeply into the meticulous preparations and strategic frameworks laid out by the major European powers on the eve of World War I, painting a vivid picture of their ambitions, miscalculations, and the rigid plans that would soon plunge the continent into chaos. At the heart of Germany's military strategy lay the Schlieffen Plan, conceived as a solution to its precarious position, surrounded by potential adversaries on both its western and eastern borders. This audacious plan aimed to avoid a drawn-out two-front war by securing a rapid and decisive victory against France. The strategy called for a massive German force to sweep through Belgium, bypassing France's heavily fortified eastern borders, and strike Paris from the north. The intent was to encircle and crush the French army swiftly, forcing a surrender within 6 weeks. This would allow Germany to redirect its forces eastward to confront the slower mobilizing Russian army. The Schlieffen Plan, however, was both inflexible and overambitious. It relied on precise timing, unimpeded progress through neutral Belgium, and the assumption that Britain would remain uninvolved. Its success hinged on everything proceeding exactly as planned, an expectation that would prove disastrously naive. France, still reeling from its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71, crafted its own strategy, Plan 17, driven by a desire for revenge and the reclamation of Alsace-Lorraine. This offensive plan embodied the French military doctrine of élan vital, the belief that sheer aggression and the indomitable spirit of its troops would overcome any obstacle. Under Plan 17, French forces would launch a direct assault into Alsace-Lorraine, pushing deep into German territory to reclaim their lost provinces and strike a blow against German morale. This strategy was deeply emotional, reflecting France's national psyche and its longing to erase the humiliation of its prior defeat. However, Plan 17 failed to account for the realities of modern warfare, including the devastating power of machine guns, artillery, and the entrenched defensive systems that would dominate the conflict. While Germany and France prepared for large-scale land offensives, Britain's strategic focus remained firmly on its naval dominance. As the world's preeminent maritime power, Britain relied on its navy to secure its global empire and protect its homeland. The rapid expansion of the German navy under Kaiser Wilhelm II had alarmed British policymakers, leading to a fierce naval arms race in the years leading up to the war. Britain's strategy emphasized maintaining control of vital sea lanes, blockading German ports, and ensuring the uninterrupted flow of supplies and troops across the empire. Although Britain had no formal obligation to defend France or Belgium, its interests were tied to maintaining the balance of power in Europe. Any threat to this balance, especially Germany's potential dominance, was viewed as an existential danger to Britain's global standing. On the Eastern Front, Russia faced immense challenges as it prepared for war. The Russian Empire, vast and resource-rich, possessed a seemingly endless supply of manpower. However, its military infrastructure was plagued by inefficiency, outdated equipment, and poor leadership. The sheer scale of the empire created logistical nightmares. Mobilizing its forces across immense distances was a slow and disorganized process. Despite these shortcomings, Russia's alliances with France and Serbia gave it significant strategic importance. It posed a dual threat to both Germany and Austria-Hungary, stretching their resources and forcing them to split their focus across multiple fronts. Russia's early mobilization efforts, though chaotic, would nonetheless shock Germany and upend its assumptions about the timing of its campaign. In contrast, Austria-Hungary entered the conflict as the weakest of the great powers, driven by internal divisions and a lack of cohesion. The empire was a patchwork of ethnicities, many of which harbored deep resentments against the central government in Vienna. These internal tensions undermined the unity and effectiveness of Austria-Hungary's military forces. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo had provided the immediate spark for the conflict, but Austria-Hungary's response was marked by indecision and over-reliance on its ally Germany. While the empire sought to assert dominance over Serbia and reassert itself as a major power, its ambitions far outstripped its capabilities. Austria-Hungary's military planning was disjointed, and its leaders were ill-prepared for the scale of the conflict they were about to face. Tuchman's narrative reveals how these preparations, while seemingly meticulous, were deeply flawed. Each nation's plans reflected a dangerous overconfidence in their ability to control the unfolding events. The rigidity of their strategies left little room for adaptation, and their reliance on outdated assumptions about warfare and diplomacy would prove catastrophic. These plans, born out of historical grievances, nationalistic fervor, and military ambition, created a volatile environment where even minor missteps could, and ultimately did, ignite a global conflagration. Through her richly detailed account, Tuchman illustrates how the seeds of destruction were sown well before the first shots were fired, as the powers of Europe marched toward a war that would devastate a generation. On June 28, 1914, the streets of Sarajevo became the stage for a moment that would alter the course of history. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie, traveled to the capital of Bosnia, a province recently annexed by Austria-Hungary. The visit was intended as a display of imperial authority, a gesture meant to solidify the Habsburg rule over a region fraught with nationalist tensions. Bosnia was home to a significant Serbian population, many of whom resented Austrian control and yearned for unification with Serbia. The Archduke's visit on this particular date, the anniversary of the historic Battle of Kosovo, a symbol of Serbian resistance, only added to the simmering resentment. Franz Ferdinand's presence in Sarajevo was both ceremonial and controversial. His plan included a parade through the city's narrow streets, an itinerary publicized in advance, making it easy for those harboring ill intent to prepare. Among them was Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb and member of the Black Hand, a secret nationalist organization dedicated to the cause of Serbian independence. Princip and his co-conspirators viewed the Archduke as a symbol of the oppression they sought to overthrow. The day began with tension, but little forewarning of the tragedy to come. As the Archduke and Sophie proceeded through Sarajevo in an open car, their route took them dangerously close to their would-be assassins. The first attempt on their lives came early. A conspirator hurled a bomb toward the motorcade. The device missed its mark, bouncing off the Archduke's car before exploding and injuring bystanders. Shaken but unharmed, Franz Ferdinand insisted on continuing with his schedule. However, the decision to take an alternate route, a safety precaution, led the couple directly into the path of Gavrilo Princip. As their car slowed near a crowded corner, Princip seized his chance. From a few feet away, he fired 2 shots. The first struck Sophie, killing her almost instantly. The second hit Franz Ferdinand, who succumbed to his wounds moments later. The shocking assassination left the city reeling and sent ripples of outrage and grief throughout Europe. To the Austro-Hungarian leadership, the act was not merely a personal tragedy, but a direct challenge to their authority. In Vienna, the assassination was seen as the culmination of Serbian defiance, a provocation that demanded a decisive response. For years, Austria-Hungary had viewed Serbia as a destabilizing force in the Balkans, its pan-Slavic ambitions threatening the delicate balance within the Habsburg Empire. The murder of Franz Ferdinand provided the justification Vienna had long sought to address the Serbian question with force. Encouraged by Germany's assurance of unconditional support, a blank check of backing, Austria-Hungary began drafting an ultimatum designed to be so severe that Serbia would have no choice but to reject it, paving the way for war. What followed was a tense and complex web of diplomatic exchanges, as Serbia attempted to navigate the demands while preserving its sovereignty. Austria-Hungary's preparations for military action grew more pronounced, while Europe's intricate alliance system began to mobilize. The assassination in Sarajevo became the spark that ignited a chain reaction, unleashing a conflict that would engulf the continent and, ultimately, the world. Tuchman's portrayal of the event highlights its tragic inevitability, a moment where personal loss and political ambition intersected to ignite one of history's most devastating wars. In the weeks following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Europe entered a turbulent and volatile period of diplomatic maneuvering that ultimately spiraled into war. The assassination, while shocking, was not an isolated event. It became the flashpoint for years of simmering tensions between nations, exacerbated by a tangled web of alliances, ambitions, and historical grievances. At the heart of the chaos were Austria-Hungary's intentions to punish Serbia, Germany's unreserved backing of its ally, and the complex reactions of Russia, Britain, and France to the unfolding crisis. Austria-Hungary, still reeling from the assassination, viewed the murder as a direct challenge to its authority and a validation of its fears about Serbia's pan-Slavic ambitions. Serbian nationalists, with their dream of uniting Slavic peoples under Serbian leadership, posed a significant threat to the stability of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was already struggling to contain nationalist sentiments among its many ethnic minorities. The assassination provided the Habsburg monarchy with the pretext it needed to confront Serbia and reassert its dominance in the Balkans. However, Austria-Hungary was acutely aware of its own military and political vulnerabilities. It knew that any decisive action against Serbia risked provoking Russian intervention, a scenario that could threaten its very survival. Desperate for reassurance, Austria-Hungary turned to Germany, its long-standing ally, for support. On July 5, 1914, Austrian representatives met with Kaiser Wilhelm II in Berlin to seek Germany's position on a potential conflict with Serbia. The Kaiser and his advisors provided Austria-Hungary with what became known as the blank check, a promise of unconditional German support for whatever course of action Vienna chose to pursue. This guarantee emboldened Austria-Hungary to act decisively. German leaders believed that a localized conflict in the Balkans could be controlled and might even strengthen Austria-Hungary's position in the region, thereby stabilizing the alliance. What they underestimated, however, was the extent to which their backing would escalate the crisis, pulling other nations into the fray. While Austria-Hungary prepared its response, Serbia turned to its protector, Russia, for support. Russia, under Tsar Nicholas II, faced immense pressure to act. As the self-declared guardian of Slavic peoples, Russia could not afford to appear weak or indifferent to Austria-Hungary's threats against Serbia. Moreover, Russia viewed its influence in the Balkans as a crucial counterbalance to Austria-Hungary's ambitions. However, Russia was not without its own vulnerabilities. Its military, though vast, was poorly organized and equipped, and the Tsar faced internal unrest and political instability. Despite these challenges, Russia began initial preparations for mobilization, signaling its readiness to stand by Serbia in the event of an Austrian attack. Amid this brewing conflict, Britain found itself in a precarious position. Britain's foreign policy had long been centered on maintaining the balance of power in Europe. While Britain had no formal obligations to defend either Serbia or Russia, its informal agreements with France and its commitment to upholding Belgian neutrality placed it in a difficult position. Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey was deeply alarmed by the escalating crisis, particularly Germany's growing support for Austria-Hungary. Grey sought to mediate, hoping to avert a larger conflict through diplomatic channels. However, Britain's attempts at negotiation were hindered by its own internal divisions, as well as the rapid pace of events that left little time for careful deliberation. France, closely allied with Russia through the Franco-Russian alliance, watched the situation unfold with increasing concern. France's strategic interests were tied to countering Germany, its historic rival, and supporting Russia as a means of maintaining the balance of power. While France was not directly involved in the initial stages of the crisis, its commitment to its alliance with Russia made its eventual involvement almost inevitable. French leaders prepared for the possibility of war, aware that any German action against Russia would likely draw France into the conflict. As tensions escalated, Austria-Hungary issued its ultimatum to Serbia on July 23, 1914. The ultimatum contained a series of demands so harsh that it was effectively designed to be rejected. Among these demands was the requirement that Austrian officials be allowed to participate in investigations within Serbia, a condition that would have severely compromised Serbian sovereignty. Despite the ultimatum's severity, Serbia, under immense pressure, accepted most of the terms while attempting to negotiate on a few key points. Austria-Hungary, however, dismissed Serbia's response as insufficient and, on July 28, declared war. The declaration of war set off a chain reaction that quickly drew other nations into the conflict. Russia, bound by its commitment to Serbia, began full mobilization of its forces. Germany, alarmed by Russia's actions, issued an ultimatum demanding that Russia halt its mobilization. When Russia refused, Germany declared war on August 1st. Germany's strategic calculations, based on the Schlieffen Plan, required a rapid offensive against France, which led Germany to demand that Belgium allow German troops to pass through its territory. Belgium's refusal and Germany's subsequent invasion on August 4th brought Britain into the war, as Britain was bound by treaty to protect Belgian neutrality. In the span of a few weeks, the crisis that had begun with the assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo had escalated into a full-scale European war. Despite public declarations from all sides that they sought to avoid conflict, the intricate web of alliances, combined with national pride and the rigid logic of military planning, had made war almost inevitable. Tuchman's account of this diplomatic chaos captures the tragic inevitability of the situation, as leaders across Europe failed to recognize, or refused to confront, the catastrophic consequences of their actions. What began as a localized dispute quickly spiraled out of control, plunging the world into a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. The outbreak of World War I in August 1914 was the culmination of decades of rising tensions, political maneuvering, and strategic planning among Europe's great powers. Once diplomatic efforts failed, the events that followed unfolded with astonishing speed and brutal efficiency, driven by rigid military strategies and the momentum of mobilization orders. The first weeks of the war revealed not only the flaws in these grand strategies, but also the devastating human and geopolitical consequences of their execution. Germany's strategy for the war, the Schlieffen Plan, was the product of years of planning and preparation. Crafted by Count Alfred von Schlieffen and refined by his successors, The plan was Germany's answer to the peril of being surrounded by enemies on both its western and eastern borders. The Schlieffen Plan aimed to avoid the nightmare of a prolonged two-front war by delivering a swift and decisive blow to France, forcing its surrender before turning to confront Russia. The plan called for a massive German force to sweep through Belgium and Luxembourg, bypassing France's heavily fortified borders and strike at Paris from the north. The objective was to encircle the French army and capture the French capital within 6 weeks, thereby eliminating France as a threat. This would allow Germany to redirect its forces to the east, where Russia, with its slower mobilization, was expected to pose a delayed but significant challenge. On August 4, 1914, Germany launched its invasion of Belgium, putting the Schlieffen Plan into action. The invasion was not merely a strategic necessity for Germany, but also a calculated gamble. Belgium's neutrality had been guaranteed by international treaty, most notably the 1839 Treaty of London, which Britain had signed. By violating Belgian neutrality, Germany not only risked British intervention, but also damaged its own international reputation. German leaders, however, dismissed British warnings as hollow, underestimating both Britain's resolve and its capacity to mobilize its empire in response. The Belgian resistance, unexpectedly fierce and determined, slowed the German advance. Civilians and soldiers alike took up arms, and fortified cities like Liège withstood German assaults longer than anticipated. The German army, frustrated by delays and determined to press forward, responded with brutal reprisals against Belgian civilians, including massacres and the burning of towns. These atrocities, widely reported in the international press, galvanized public opinion against Germany and painted it as the aggressor in the conflict. Germany's invasion of Belgium triggered Britain's entry into the war. Britain had long maintained a policy of protecting the balance of power in Europe, and the violation of Belgian neutrality provided both a moral justification and a strategic imperative for intervention. On August 4th, Britain declared war on Germany, and British expeditionary forces began preparing to join their French allies on the Western Front. The entry of Britain, with its vast empire and formidable navy, transformed what might have been a regional conflict into a truly global war. While Germany's focus remained on executing the Schlieffen Plan, France launched its own strategy, Plan 17. This plan called for aggressive offensives into Alsace-Lorraine, the provinces lost to Germany in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71. French military doctrine emphasized élan vital, the belief in the moral superiority and fighting spirit of its soldiers. French commanders believed that bold and energetic attacks could overcome any obstacle, including Germany's defensive preparations. In mid-August, French forces launched a series of offensives into Alsace-Lorraine, hoping to recapture the lost territories and deal a psychological blow to Germany. However, the French underestimated the strength of German defenses and the destructive power of modern weaponry, including machine guns and heavy artillery. The offensives quickly devolved into bloody disasters, with French forces suffering heavy casualties. The early failures forced France to abandon its initial strategy and adopt a more defensive posture, reinforcing the Western Front as German forces pushed closer to Paris. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, Russia moved with unexpected speed. Despite its logistical challenges and outdated infrastructure, the Russian Empire mobilized its vast armies more quickly than Germany had anticipated. By mid-August, Russian forces launched twin offensives into East Prussia and Galicia, threatening both German and Austro-Hungarian territories. The German High Command, caught off guard by Russia's rapid mobilization, was forced to divert troops from the Western Front to strengthen its eastern defenses. The Battle of Tannenberg, fought from August 26 to 30th, marked a critical turning point on the Eastern Front. Under the command of Generals Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, German forces decisively defeated the advancing Russian army, inflicting catastrophic losses and capturing tens of thousands of prisoners. While Tannenberg was a major victory for Germany, it highlighted the challenges of fighting a war on two fronts. The need to shift troops eastward strained the Schlieffen Plan's timetable, contributing to delays on the Western Front. Austria-Hungary, Germany's ally, faced its own difficulties. The empire's early offensives against Serbia faltered, exposing the weaknesses of its military organization and leadership. Serbia's smaller but more experienced army inflicted humiliating defeats on Austria-Hungarian forces, complicating Vienna's plans for a quick and decisive campaign. At the same time, Austria-Hungary struggled to contain Russian advances in Galicia, forcing it to rely increasingly on German support. By late August 1914, the Western Front began to stabilize. Germany's advance through Belgium and northern France slowed as supply lines stretched thin and resistance stiffened. French and British forces mounted a desperate defense, culminating in the First Battle of the Marne in early September. The Marne marked the end of Germany's hopes for a quick victory in the West. The war settled into a grueling stalemate, with both sides digging trenches that would define the front for years to come. Tuchman's detailed account of these early weeks of the war underscores the scale and complexity of the conflict. The rigid strategies that nations had spent years developing proved inadequate in the face of modern warfare, and the optimistic predictions of quick victories were replaced by the grim reality of a prolonged and devastating struggle. The invasion of Belgium, Britain's intervention, and the simultaneous campaigns on multiple fronts demonstrated how interconnected the fates of nations had become. What began as a localized conflict in the Balkans had now engulfed all of Europe, setting the stage for a war that would reshape the world. The opening battles of World War I on both the Western and Eastern fronts were marked by a brutal collision of grand strategies, the ambitions of nations, and the stark realities of modern warfare. These engagements, fought with the belief that the war would be short and decisive, quickly shattered any illusions of a quick resolution and exposed the flaws in planning, coordination, and leadership. They also foreshadowed the immense human and material costs that would come to define the conflict. On the Western Front, Germany moved swiftly to implement the Schlieffen Plan, a strategy designed to secure a quick victory against France by bypassing its heavily fortified borders and invading through neutral Belgium. Germany's leaders believed this rapid offensive would allow them to encircle and defeat the French army, capture Paris, and force France into surrender within 6 weeks. The strategy relied on speed, precision, and the assumption that Belgian resistance would be minimal and Britain would remain uninvolved. Early in the campaign, it seemed the plan might succeed. German forces swept through Belgium with overwhelming numbers, capturing key towns and routing the Belgian army. However, the Belgian resistance proved far stronger than anticipated. Fortified positions like those at Liège slowed the German advance and disrupted their carefully calculated timetable. Even as German forces pushed forward, they faced logistical challenges, including overstretched supply lines and the sheer difficulty of coordinating such a massive invasion force. The German invasion of Belgium also had significant geopolitical repercussions. Belgium's neutrality had been guaranteed by international treaty, and its violation shocked the world. Britain, which had long maintained a policy of protecting Belgian neutrality as a cornerstone of European stability, now found itself drawn into the conflict. Public outrage over Germany's actions, including reports of atrocities against Belgian civilians, galvanized British support for war. On August 4th, Britain declared war on Germany, and the British Expeditionary Force, BF, began preparations to join its French allies on the continent. Though initially small in number, the BF's well-trained troops would soon play a critical role in halting the German advance. As German forces crossed into northern France, the French army mobilized under General Joseph Joffre, determined to defend the homeland. France's initial strategy, known as Plan 17, had called for aggressive offensives into Alsace-Lorraine, but these attacks had been repelled with heavy losses. Joffre quickly adjusted his plans, reorganizing his forces to counter the German advance. By early September, German troops were within striking distance of Paris. It was here, along the Marne River, that the French and British armies made their stand. The First Battle of the Marne, fought from September 5th to 12th, was a desperate and decisive engagement. French taxis famously ferried reinforcements to the front lines, a symbol of national resolve and resourcefulness. The battle forced the Germans to retreat and abandon their hopes for a quick victory. It marked the end of the Schlieffen Plan and the beginning of a new, grimmer phase of the war. As both sides dug in, trench lines stretched from the North Sea to the Swiss border, locking the Western Front into a brutal stalemate that would last for years. While the Western Front descended into trenches and attrition, the Eastern Front saw dramatic and fluid engagements. Russia, bound by its alliances with Serbia and France, mobilized its massive armies with surprising speed. Despite logistical challenges and internal disorganization, Russian forces launched twin offensives into East Prussia and Galicia in an attempt to relieve pressure on their allies and exploit perceived weaknesses in the Central Powers' eastern defenses. In East Prussia, Russian generals Alexander Samsonov and Paul von Rennenkampf advanced with separate armies, hoping to overwhelm the German defenders. Initially, their campaign met with success, as German forces retreated in the face of superior numbers. However, The lack of coordination between Samsonov and Rennenkampf would prove disastrous. Germany responded by appointing generals Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff to command the Eastern Theater. These two commanders, backed by a highly efficient staff, orchestrated a masterful counteroffensive. Using their interior lines of communication, they exploited the gap between the two Russian armies to encircle Samsonov's forces. The resulting Battle of Tannenberg, fought from August 26 to 30th, was a catastrophic defeat for Russia. German forces annihilated Samsonov's army, inflicting tens of thousands of casualties and taking over 90,000 prisoners. Samsonov, devastated by the scale of the defeat, took his own life. The victory at Tannenberg became a source of immense national pride for Germany, bolstering morale and elevating Hindenburg and Ludendorff to legendary status. However, the battle also underscored the immense challenges of waging war on multiple fronts. The diversion of German troops to the east, while necessary, further strained the already faltering Schlieffen Plan on the Western Front. In Galicia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire faced its own struggles against Russian forces. Austria-Hungary, weakened by internal divisions and poor leadership, launched poorly coordinated offensives that met with disaster. The Russian army advanced into Galicia, capturing vast territories and inflicting heavy losses on the Austro-Hungarian forces. This front became a symbol of Austria-Hungary's growing dependence on Germany, as it became increasingly clear that the empire could not sustain its war effort without substantial German support. By the end of September 1914, the contours of the conflict had been established. On the Western Front, the failure of the Schlieffen Plan and the subsequent stalemate signaled that the war would not be the swift and decisive conflict many had anticipated. On the Eastern Front, the dramatic Russian defeat at Tannenberg and Austria-Hungary's struggles in Galicia highlighted the fluid and unpredictable nature of the fighting there. The initial optimism and nationalism that had fueled the rush to war were already giving way to the grim realization of its scale and destructiveness. Tuchman's account of these early battles captures both their strategic significance and their human cost. The First Battle of the Marne and the Battle of Tannenberg were not just military engagements, but turning points that revealed the realities of industrialized warfare. The rapid-fire succession of events, from Germany's invasion of Belgium to Russia's twin offensives, illustrated the interconnectedness of the war and the catastrophic consequences of miscalculation and overconfidence. The early months of World War I set the stage for a conflict that would reshape nations, devastate millions, and redefine the nature of warfare itself. As the initial clashes of World War I unfolded across Europe, the conflict began to expand beyond the continent's borders, drawing in nations far removed from the original theaters of war. What had begun as a European dispute quickly escalated into a global conflict, with alliances, imperial ambitions, and strategic interests pulling countries from other continents into the fray. By late 1914, the involvement of nations like the Ottoman Empire, Turkey, and Japan signaled the transformation of the war into a truly worldwide struggle, while the mobilization of colonial resources further extended its reach. The Ottoman Empire, long referred to as the sick man of Europe, was initially hesitant to enter the war. Its leaders, facing internal instability and external threats, recognized the potential risks of becoming entangled in a conflict of this magnitude. However, the empire's declining power and territorial losses over the previous decades made its leaders keenly aware of the opportunity to reclaim influence and territory by aligning with the Central Powers. Germany, in particular, courted the Ottoman Empire as an ally, recognizing its strategic importance in controlling access to the Black Sea, the Eastern Mediterranean, and the critical trade routes that passed through the Suez Canal. In late October 1914, the Ottoman Empire formally entered the war on the side of the Central Powers. This decision immediately widened the scope of the conflict, opening new fronts in the Middle East, the Caucasus, and North Africa. Ottoman forces launched an offensive against Russia in the Caucasus, though the harsh winter and logistical difficulties led to significant setbacks. The empire also played a key role in challenging British control of the Suez Canal and the surrounding territories, threatening the lifelines of the British Empire. Perhaps most famously, the Ottoman entry into the war set the stage for the Gallipoli campaign in 1915, where Allied forces attempted, and failed, to secure a direct route to Russia by capturing the Dardanelles. The Ottoman involvement in the war not only expanded the geographic scope of the conflict, but also brought the complexities of ethnic and religious tensions within its borders to the forefront, as Arab uprisings and British-backed insurgencies began to challenge Ottoman rule. Far to the east, Japan's entry into the war on the side of the Allies marked another significant expansion of the conflict. Japan, eager to assert itself as a modern imperial power, seized the opportunity presented by the war to expand its influence in Asia. In August 1914, Japan declared war on Germany, citing its alliance with Britain as the basis for its involvement. However, Japan's true motivations lay in its desire to secure dominance over German-held territories in the Pacific and China. Japanese forces quickly captured the German-controlled port of Tsingtao in China's Shandong Peninsula and occupied several Pacific islands held by Germany. Japan's actions in the war highlighted its imperial ambitions and set the stage for tensions with Western powers in the post-war period. As these new powers enter the conflict, the war also drew heavily on the vast resources of European colonial empires. Britain and France, in particular, mobilized their colonies to support the war effort, drawing manpower, raw materials, and supplies from Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Indian troops fought on multiple fronts from the Middle East to Europe, while African soldiers and laborers were deployed in campaigns across the continent, including in the German colonies of East and West Africa. The war's reach extended even to the Pacific, where Australian and New Zealand forces participated in campaigns against German territories. The reliance on colonial resources not only expanded the geographical scope of the war, but also had profound implications for the colonies themselves. Many colonial subjects fought in the war with the hope of earning greater autonomy or recognition from their imperial rulers, only to find those aspirations dashed in the post-war settlements. At the same time, the strain of the war effort exposed the vulnerabilities of European empires, as colonial uprisings and demands for independence began to grow in the years following the war. By late 1914, the war's transformation into a global conflict was undeniable. The involvement of nations like the Ottoman Empire and Japan, combined with extensive mobilization of colonial resources, ensured that the fighting would not be confined to Europe's battlefields. The war's expanding scope underscored the interconnectedness of the modern world and highlighted how the ambitions and interests of distant powers could shape the trajectory of a conflict that, at its outset, seemed firmly rooted in European rivalries. Tuchman's narrative captures this shift, illustrating how World War I became not just a European war, but a global calamity that would redraw the political and social maps of the world. Finalizing the Guns of August, Barbara Tuchman concludes the errors revealed in the war's early days. As she brings her analysis of the war's opening phase to a close, she highlights the critical errors and miscalculations that set the stage for one of history's most protracted and devastating conflicts. The initial strategies of all the major powers, conceived with the expectation of swift victories, unraveled almost immediately under the harsh realities of modern warfare. These failures signaled the collapse of the illusion that the war could be resolved quickly and decisively, revealing instead the grim likelihood of a prolonged and brutal stalemate. Germany's Schlieffen Plan, for all its intricate calculations, failed to deliver the swift victory it promised. The delays caused by Belgian resistance, the logistical challenges of sustaining a rapid advance, and the unexpectedly effective counter-offensive at the Marne shattered Germany's hopes of a quick triumph on the Western Front. The plan's rigid structure left no room for adaptation, and the need to divert forces to the Eastern Front further strained its execution. What was meant to be a swift march to Paris instead devolved into a trench-bound deadlock that would consume millions of lives over the following years. France's Plan 17, driven by national pride and the ideal of Elan Vital, also faltered. The aggressive offensives into Alsace-Lorraine not only failed to reclaim the lost provinces, but also resulted in catastrophic losses that forced France onto the defensive. The belief in the superiority of morale over material strength proved tragically misguided in the face of machine guns, heavy artillery, and modern defensive tactics. Russia's rapid mobilization and bold offensives into East Prussia and Galicia were similarly marked by overconfidence and poor coordination. While initially successful in forcing Germany and Austria-Hungary to divert resources, the disastrous defeat at Tannenberg exposed the weaknesses of the Russian command structure and the logistical limitations of its massive but unwieldy army. Austria-Hungary, for its part, struggled to manage even its more modest objectives, with its poorly led and fragmented forces failing to achieve decisive victories in either Serbia or Galicia. Tuchman emphasizes that these failures were not merely the result of flawed plans, but also of human misjudgment. Leaders across Europe underestimated the complexity and unpredictability of modern warfare, clinging to outdated notions of strategy and national pride. The decisions made during these early days, whether in the form of inflexible battle plans, miscommunications, or underestimations of the enemy, compounded the tragedy and ensured that the conflict would spiral into a long and bloody ordeal. Far from being a series of disconnected events, Tuchman argues that the early stages of the war were shaped by a web of interconnected errors. Each misstep, whether in diplomacy, strategy, or execution, exacerbated the situation, driving the nations of Europe deeper into conflict. The momentum of mobilization, the entanglements of alliances, and the inability to adapt to unforeseen challenges all contributed to the war's escalation and its catastrophic scale. In her conclusion, Tuchman underscores the tragedy of these early miscalculations. The war, she argues, was not an inevitable outcome but a result of human error, of arrogance, overconfidence, and a failure to grasp the consequences of actions taken in haste or hubris. By illuminating the profound errors of judgment that marked the war's beginning, Tuchman invites readers to reflect on the lessons of history and the enduring importance of understanding how human decisions can shape the fate of nations. Thank you for your time, and please feel free to leave your comment or anything you would like to suggest or discuss. We will see you again with the next book. Appreciate your subscription and like. Thank you.